I never expected two women on the street to invite me to sit between them, but the moment I did, everything changed. It was one of those late afternoons when the city feels soft around the edges. The sun hung low, painting the streets with golden light that made everything shimmer gently: pavement, shop windows, even the dust motes drifting lazily in the air. I was walking without any particular plan, my hands shoved into the pockets of my jacket, headphones tucked away, just letting the city sounds wash over me. Somewhere nearby, the smell of freshly baked bread drifted from a small bakery, mingling with the faint tang of street exhaust. And then I saw them. Two women standing near a market stall, casually browsing, but not in the rushed, distracted way most people do. They moved with a quiet confidence, each gesture effortless. One reached for a jar of preserves, her fingers brushing the glass lightly, her nails catching the light. The other leaned slightly forward, laughing softly at something the first had said. It was that kind of laugh that seems to linger in the air, warm and unforced, like sunlight through a window. I felt a sudden, almost inexplicable pull, as if the rhythm of their presence somehow synced with mine. They weren't looking for attention, and yet, somehow, my gaze kept finding them. I noticed the small details, the graceful curve of their posture, the subtle warmth in their smiles, the ease of their companionship. There was something magnetic about them, not loud or flashy, just quietly compelling. As I walked past, my shoulder brushed against a crate of tomatoes, and I muttered a soft, awkward apology. One of the women glanced at me, her eyes meeting mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary. That small moment, just her gaze, made me catch my own breath without even realizing it. There was curiosity there, maybe amusement, and a hint of something I couldn't quite name. Then, as if on a shared, unspoken agreement, one of them took a step forward and spoke. Her voice was calm, melodic, almost soothing, cutting through the hum of the street without raising itself above it. "Hey, why don't you come sit with us?" she said, nodding toward a nearby bench. It wasn't a question in the usual sense. It was more like an invitation into a space that was unexpectedly open, welcoming, and yet slightly forbidden in the way it startled me. I hesitated, feeling a flush rise to my cheeks. Normally, strangers don't invite me into their space, and yet here I was, caught between curiosity and caution. Something about the easy confidence in their posture, the warmth in their smiles, made saying no feel almost impossible. And so I took a step closer, unsure but undeniably drawn, noticing the faint fragrance of their perfumes mingling subtly in the air, a delicate, almost intangible hint of flowers and something warmer, like sunlight on skin. It was that moment, that pause, that told me this encounter would linger far longer than a simple street-side greeting ever could. Little did I know, sitting between them would change everything about the way I thought about chance, connection, and desire. The bench was just a few steps away, tucked under a sprawling tree whose leaves whispered with the late afternoon breeze. Its wood was slightly weathered, warmed by the lingering sun, and it seemed almost too ordinary to hold the extraordinary moment that was about to unfold. I hesitated at the edge, unsure if I should cross the invisible boundary they had set without saying a word. One of the women tilted her head slightly, the sunlight catching in her hair in a way that made it look almost liquid gold. Her eyes met mine again, steady and unflinching, with just the faintest hint of invitation in their depths. "The space is empty," she said softly, nodding toward the bench. "Just for you." There was no pressure in her tone, only warmth, but my chest tightened in response. My mind raced with a mixture of curiosity and hesitation. The other woman, seated casually with one leg tucked under the other, gave a small, welcoming smile, her fingers brushing lightly against her own arm as if to adjust her posture, and yet somehow that gesture seemed directed at me. I could feel it, the subtle electricity in the air, the tension of possibility that wasn't spoken aloud. Every instinct screamed caution, and yet every heartbeat pulled me closer. I stepped toward the bench, my shoes scraping softly against the stone pavement. As I lowered myself into the space between them, a gentle hush seemed to settle over the scene, as if the city itself had decided to step back. My knees nearly touched theirs, and I became acutely aware of the warmth radiating from their bodies, the subtle sense, one faintly floral, the other earthy and sweet, that mingled in the air around me. Almost immediately, the first touch happened. Her elbow brushed lightly against mine, accidental, or perhaps intentional, and the contact lingered just long enough to send a ripple of awareness through me. I swallowed, noticing how natural it felt, how unforced, yet undeniably intimate. The second woman leaned back slightly, her hand hovering near mine on the bench for a moment before settling on her lap, and I felt the shared closeness, the rhythm of unspoken comfort between the three of us. Conversation began, but it wasn't about anything monumental. They talked about the market, the slow drift of the afternoon, little observations about the city that made it feel alive in ways I hadn't noticed. Their laughter blended softly with the murmur of the street, and I realized how rare it was to feel such immediate, effortless connection. Each glance between them, each subtle gesture, the tilt of a head, the shift of a shoulder, spoke volumes about their ease with one another and the quiet welcome extended toward me. For the first time that day, I let myself breathe a little deeper, sinking into the rhythm of the moment. The nervous tension that had followed me through the streets melted into something warmer, more delicate. I noticed the curve of her smile as she listened to me, the thoughtful way she leaned in when I spoke, and the gentle brush of her hair as she tucked a loose strand behind her ear. Each small act of attention felt like an unspoken affirmation, a quiet agreement that I belonged here, even if only for this fleeting afternoon. And as the fountain's water tinkled softly nearby, I realized that this simple act, sitting between them, was no longer about chance. It was a beginning, subtle yet electric, a moment suspended between possibility and desire, where time itself seemed willing to slow down just enough for everything to matter. Sitting there, I began to notice the small rhythms of their presence, the way one of them tapped her fingers lightly against the bench when she laughed, the way the other tilted her head slightly whenever she listened, as though she were balancing the world in that gentle gesture. Conversation started to flow naturally, like water carving paths through stone, and for the first time that day, I felt entirely present. We talked about nothing and everything: the market, the smell of fresh bread wafting from the bakery down the street, the late afternoon sun that gilded the city in gold. Yet beneath the simplicity of our words there was a subtle current, a quiet electricity that threaded between us, almost imperceptible but undeniably there. Every glance, every slight movement carried weight. Their eyes would meet mine just a second too long, and in that small hesitation, the world seemed to shrink to the space of the bench, the rhythm of their breathing, the warmth of their bodies close to mine. One of the women reached out to adjust a stray thread on her scarf, her fingers brushing lightly across the back of her hand, and in the process, my own hand nearly met hers. The contact didn't startle me. Instead, it anchored me, a quiet reassurance that we were all here together, sharing this suspended moment. The smallest gestures became charged with meaning, the way she leaned slightly toward me to emphasize a point, the way her shoulder brushed mine as we laughed at some trivial observation. I became aware of the texture of the bench beneath me, the faint scent of their perfume mixing with the street air, the warmth radiating from their proximity. As the conversation deepened, so did the intimacy. They told small, seemingly mundane stories from their lives, and I found myself leaning in, captivated not just by the words but by the way they spoke them, measured, thoughtful, quietly revealing layers beneath their confident exteriors. One of them traced the rim of her coffee cup absent-mindedly, her gaze soft and attentive, and I felt a pang of connection, a sense that she was truly seeing me, not just the person passing through her day. I realized how unusual it was to feel so immediately attuned to someone, how natural their attention and care felt, and how intoxicating the subtle touches were, the brush of an arm, the shared laugh that lingered just a second longer than socially necessary, the casual closeness that felt deliberate yet entirely unforced. Every small interaction seemed amplified in the warmth of the fading sun, every glance heavy with unspoken understanding. And yet, there was restraint. Nothing was rushed, nothing overtly demanded. It was as if the world had given us permission to exist in this quiet pocket of time, where physical closeness and emotional openness could coexist without need for explanation. I noticed my own breathing, my racing heartbeat, the way my attention clung to their expressions, their gestures, the soft cadence of their voices. The attraction simmered gently under the surface, unspoken but undeniable. By the time the shadows began to lengthen and the streetlights flickered on, I realized I wasn't just sitting between two women. I was sitting at the beginning of something that promised depth, warmth, and a slow-burn intimacy that could unfold in countless unhurried, meaningful moments. In that ordinary street scene, surrounded by ordinary sounds, an extraordinary connection had taken root. As the sun dipped lower, casting long amber shadows across the street, the easy chatter we'd shared began to shift. There was a softness in the air, a quiet lull that invited honesty. One of the women's eyes lingered on a distant building, and when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but beneath it lay a thread of something more: memory, reflection, perhaps even a quiet ache. "I sometimes wonder how different life would feel if I'd made other choices," she said, her fingers brushing idly against the rim of her coffee cup. She didn't look at me directly, but the weight of her words seemed to reach into the space between us. I felt an unexpected urge to lean in, to offer comfort, though I wasn't sure how. The other woman, seated beside her, placed a hand gently over hers, a soft, grounding touch that radiated warmth. "We all wonder that," she replied. Her thumb traced a lazy circle over the back of her friend's hand. "But the choices we've made, they brought us here, didn't they?" Her eyes finally met mine, and for the first time, I noticed a vulnerability mirrored there, a quiet openness that went beyond words. I found myself listening with a deeper awareness, each subtle gesture, each pause, each small sigh carrying meaning. Their vulnerability wasn't dramatic or performative. It was understated, like sunlight slipping through a curtain. It drew me in, made my chest ache with the recognition of shared humanity. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap between curiosity and connection, but I knew restraint was part of the intimacy. One of them shifted closer, her shoulder brushing mine lightly, almost accidentally, though it wasn't. I felt the warmth transfer in the brief contact, subtle yet electric, grounding me in the moment. Her fingers, as they tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, hovered near my hand for a heartbeat, and I resisted the impulse to hold it, savoring instead the fragile tension, the unspoken acknowledgement of presence. Their stories were small yet profound. One spoke of a lost love from years ago, the memory lingering in her eyes. The other spoke of quiet moments of loneliness in crowded rooms, the ache of being understood yet unseen. Each confession was a bridge, connecting their inner worlds to mine. I realized that the attraction I felt wasn't just about appearance or charm. It was about access, the rare intimacy of being allowed into the private corners of their hearts. I noticed the little things that made the moment tangible, the subtle scent of her perfume, floral and comforting, the way her fingers curved around the edge of her cup, the faint tremor in her voice when she admitted something personal. Each detail heightened the sense of closeness, the silent permission to exist fully in their presence. By the time the sun's glow faded entirely, leaving the street bathed in the soft, reflective light of early evening, I felt an unspoken bond forming, not through grand gestures, but through these quiet, deliberate moments of vulnerability. Sitting there between them, I realized that the slow burn wasn't just in desire, it was in the trust, the shared humanity, and the intimacy of unguarded hearts. The city had begun to transform as evening approached. Streetlights flickered on, casting pools of golden light that shimmered off wet cobblestones from an earlier drizzle. The hum of distant traffic softened, replaced by the gentle trickle of the fountain beside the bench. Everything felt more intimate somehow, as if the world had slowed down to accommodate the quiet electricity building between us. Their laughter, lighter now but tinged with something deeper, wrapped around me, drawing me in. I noticed how the first woman leaned slightly closer while explaining something about the market, her shoulder brushing mine in a touch that was both accidental and deliberate. The warmth of her proximity made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't anticipated. I was hyper-aware of every small movement, every subtle cue that suggested closeness, yet none of it was forced. The second woman reached for her coffee, and our hands nearly met on the cup. The brief brush, fleeting as it was, sent a ripple through me. It wasn't just physical, it was charged with unspoken possibility. My mind raced, trying to process the way something so simple could feel electric. There was no overt romantic gesture, no grand declaration, yet every look, every shift in posture, seemed heavy with meaning. They spoke in a rhythm that felt natural yet hypnotic. When the first woman laughed, I felt it in my chest, a warmth that lingered long after the sound faded. When the second woman tilted her head, listening intently, I caught the soft curve of her neck, the gentle fall of her hair, and it struck me how beautiful vulnerability could be. I became acutely conscious of the space between us, the inches that carried weight far beyond their physical measurement. For the first time, I realized that the attraction simmering between us wasn't loud or urgent. It was quiet, deliberate, and almost teasing. The way they exchanged glances with each other, the slight smiles that lingered when they looked at me, created a tension that was both thrilling and comforting. There was a sense of shared understanding, an unspoken agreement that this closeness could exist without rushing, without expectation. My own body responded to every nuance, the warmth of their shoulders near mine, the subtle scent of their perfume mingling with the cool evening air, the softness of their laughter echoing in my ears. I felt my heartbeat accelerate, not with fear or embarrassment, but with anticipation and the recognition that something meaningful was unfolding. Even as I tried to remain composed, I noticed my own hesitation, the urge to reach for a hand, the temptation to lean closer, to bridge the distance that felt both intimate and fragile. And yet, in that very restraint, the tension grew, more electric than any overt gesture could have created. By the time the last rays of sunlight faded, leaving the street bathed in soft lamplight, the bench had become a small universe of its own. We were connected through gestures, through silences, through subtle touches that spoke louder than words. The tension was palpable, but it wasn't frantic or forced. It was a slow, delicious anticipation that promised something deeper, something real, if only we allowed it to continue unfolding. The street had grown quieter, the evening folding into a soft, tranquil calm. The fountain beside the bench trickled steadily, a gentle counterpoint to the rhythm of our shared breaths and unspoken thoughts. There was a stillness in the air, as if the city itself had leaned back to watch this moment unfold. I noticed the way one of the women shifted slightly, her fingers brushing against the edge of the bench, the faint warmth of her hand lingering in the air long after. She looked at me, really looked, and I felt the sudden, delicate weight of expectation. Not the kind that demanded, but the kind that invited honesty. My own chest tightened as I realized how much I wanted to meet her gaze without pretense, to offer something real in return. I'm glad I sat here, I admitted quietly, my voice low, almost swallowed by the gentle hum of the evening. I wasn't sure at first, but now, I don't want to leave. The words felt clumsy, yet they carried the truth of my attention, the recognition that this connection, unexpected, fragile, was grounding me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The first woman's lips curved into a soft, understanding smile. She leaned closer, her shoulder brushing mine with a deliberate tenderness that sent a small shiver through me. Her eyes, warm and luminous, held something like gratitude and quiet acknowledgement, as if she understood exactly what I was feeling without needing me to say more. The second woman followed, her gaze meeting mine for a brief, suspended moment. Her hand rested near mine on the bench, close enough that the warmth from her touch seemed to seep through the thin air between us. There was a stillness in that touch, calm, deliberate, intimate, that spoke more profoundly than words could. In that instant, I understood that the pull I felt wasn't fleeting, it was steady, genuine, and unspokenly reciprocated. For a while, we simply existed in that shared silence, each of us aware of the subtle, almost electric closeness between our bodies. I noticed the way her hair fell softly across her shoulder as she tilted her head, the faint curve of a smile playing at the corners of her lips, the rhythm of her breathing blending with my own. Each detail, each small movement, seemed amplified by the quiet intimacy of the evening. Finally, the first woman spoke again, her voice gentle, almost confessional. "It's rare," she said, "to find someone who just fits, even for a moment." Her words weren't directed at me alone, they seemed to include all three of us, acknowledging the delicate balance we'd found on that small bench. The second woman's hand lightly brushed mine as she smiled, her eyes soft and knowing, a quiet reassurance that this connection was mutual and unthreatened. I felt an unexpected swell of gratitude and relief. The slow, careful tension that had simmered between us now softened into something warmer, more human. There was no rush, no urgent demand, only the quiet acknowledgement that we had found a rare intimacy, one built on trust, openness, and the small, meaningful gestures that tethered our hearts together. As the evening deepened and the streetlights cast their golden glow, I realized that this was more than chance. Sitting there between them, sharing this quiet, honest space, I had discovered a connection that promised something real, tender, and enduring, one that didn't need to be spoken aloud to be profoundly felt. The evening had fully embraced the street, bathing everything in a soft amber glow from the lampposts. The gentle hum of distant traffic was now a soothing backdrop, blending seamlessly with the trickle of the fountain and the occasional rustle of leaves overhead. It was quiet, unhurried, the kind of calm that makes every small detail feel more vivid. We rose from the bench together, a trio moving almost instinctively in unison. I felt the comforting warmth of their presence on either side of me, the subtle brush of shoulders, the occasional clasp of hands in passing, small gestures that carried a weight far beyond their simplicity. Each movement was deliberate yet effortless, an unspoken choreography that spoke of trust, affection, and shared understanding. We walked slowly, our steps matching the languid rhythm of the evening. One of the women reached out, tucking a stray strand of my hair behind my ear with the softest touch, her fingers lingering just long enough for me to feel the warmth, the quiet intimacy. I smiled, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between us. The other woman leaned in slightly, resting her shoulder gently against mine, her presence grounding me, reminding me that closeness could be both safe and thrilling. The city around us seemed to recede, leaving only the space we occupied together. I noticed the little things, the flicker of her eyelashes when she laughed, the delicate curve of her lips as she listened intently, the subtle scent of her perfume mingling with the cool evening air. Every detail deepened the sense of connection, a slow-burn intimacy that didn't demand anything more than being present. At one point, we paused near a small cafe, its warm lights spilling onto the pavement. One of the women lightly touched my arm, her fingers tracing a gentle path that sent a quiet thrill through me. The other gave me a reassuring smile, her eyes soft and steady, and I realized that this moment, simple, unremarkable to any passerby, was extraordinary for us. It was the culmination of hours filled with small gestures, shared laughter, subtle glances, and the quiet confessions that had built a bridge between our hearts. We found a spot nearby to rest once more, sitting close enough that our knees brushed occasionally, our shoulders pressing together in comfortable familiarity. There were no words necessary, the silence spoke volumes. I felt seen, understood, and accepted in a way I had rarely experienced. The subtle tension that had simmered between us had transformed into warmth, a gentle glow that radiated through every touch, every glance. As the evening drew to a close, I realized that sitting between them had become more than a moment of curiosity or chance. It had grown into a shared space of trust, intimacy, and quiet affection. The slow-burn connection we had nurtured was real, YouTube-safe, and profoundly human. It didn't need urgency or grand declarations, just the steady, patient warmth of hearts aligned, of hands brushing, of shoulders touching, and of shared smiles that lingered long after they were given. Walking away from the cafe, I carried that warmth with me, a soft, enduring memory of two extraordinary women who had invited me into their world, and in doing so, allowed me to discover a quiet, lasting connection that neither time nor circumstance could diminish. For the first time in a long while, I felt completely at home in someone else's presence, and they were right there, side by side, making it impossible to forget the gentle, human intimacy we had shared.